Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. Super excited for this one. Today I have with me Dr. Nick A, or Nick Almond from Factory DAO. Welcome.
Nice to meet you, mate, and thanks very much for having me on.
Yeah, no, I had a while ago watched the video from you that you gave at ETH Berlin on the three big V's and value, and I thought that was an awesome talk. And I wanted
Thanks,
to
man.
talk to you, but then like I had said before, I didn't actually know that was your Twitter account. So I'm glad that I met you here and we can talk. So I was just gonna jump right into the questions if that's cool.
Yeah,
Um,
let's do it.
yeah, we can just get so you design DAOs, right? Like, or help people make DAOs. I had just had on, we'll kind of continue with the theme that I've been doing on my deep dives. It's how do you deal with this subjectivity piece, right? And this
hmm
this kind of goes into a lot of what you had been talking about lately. It's just, so let's say you have a DAO and it manages a big pool of money. How do you decide how to move that money in a way that's not capturable? And that's,
Yes.
this is really, really hard. So I'll just kind of pass the floor over. What's the answer?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there, isn't there? There's the kind of subjectivity piece, the kind of social consensus element, if you like. So we've got some resources that we have the ability to spend. What should we spend it on? So there's a kind of social consensus level problem there, which is like, how do you maximally deploy the capital that you have to best realize the outcomes that you're looking for? And then how do you do that in a way that it doesn't just get captured? Because, there's when you put a big pool of money online and, you've got a group of pseudonymous people who can access that, that's going to be a problem, right? So, in those sort of broad two categories, largely we've got stuck into a paradigm of DAOs that I think is suboptimal for both of those things, actually. So we've, largely, I think we've got a lot of hangovers from the DAO, which was the original DAO pattern, which is basically, you put money into a pot, you exchange your ether, let's say, for some tokens in some kind of pro rata fashion. So I put one ETH in, get 10,000 tokens out. I'll have the original DAO, and they then become voting rights. And we've got stuck in this kind of one token, one vote paradigm of DAOs, which lends itself to this kind of pure plutocratic sort of dynamic, which makes sense in a lot of crypto systems, right? When you're looking at raw crypto economics, you want the people with the most capital to have the most influence. But when it moves into this realm of like, let's do something together that has potentially like arbitrary outcomes, then you want the decision-making power to be closer to how it functions in a traditional organization, or at least in a decentralized organization. So you want the decision-making power located around the people who know what they're doing, not necessarily who's put the most money in the pot. So that's one of the things that I've been very interested in. I think there's angles on reputation-weighted voting, different ways of structuring decision-making in DAOs. That's some of the things we might want to get into. And then the kind of other piece is doing that in a way where if you move away from this very plutocratic dynamic, how do you not just get overtaken by grifters and all that sort of stuff? And largely a lot, even though most people kind of hate DAOs at the moment, and we've had like, the sentiment of DAOs as a primitive is totally in the gutter. They're still happening, right? Every major protocol is launching with a DAO, and it is the path to decentralizing these things and putting them under community control. So they're happening. So we need to evolve the mechanism.
Well, I mean, they could be happening for governance tokens, right? I mean,
Well,
it's
yeah, I mean, most of the L2s are coming in with DAOs, right? So we are moving past the kind of useless governance token paradigm.
Okay.
And a lot of, so like I'm particularly interested in the kind of ZK Sync DAO at the moment. And I'm trying to convince them to move into a more sort of cybernetic organism kind of approach to more governance minimized. But yeah, we are looking at these things, like Arbitrum, Optimism, ZK Sync, and quite a few of the forthcoming L2s are all going for protocol DAO setups.
Well, I mean, this would be like the base problem with like a DAO, right? Like, most of these chains, they want to sort of say that they're sovereign, right? That they're not sort of defined by their bridge. So you have a hack over here on Optimism, and we want to fork. So like we want to upgrade it in some way. And this is kind of what you were talking about. Like, how do you sort of identify what we all want to do in a way that's not just money based?
Yes,
theoretically.
So yeah, let's dig into that. I've been working on an idea for this for a number of years now. I call semantic governance, which is around finding the meaning that exists, the kind of shared meaning that can exist between many participants, right? So from kind of classic governance world, you would build these shared mental models around what it is we all want. So you need a kind of anchor of meaning. So the way I've been thinking about that is through what are the ontologies that we want to coordinate around. So for example, the kind of L2 thing, a lot of the reasons why they use DAOs is because particularly on these kind of ZK proving systems and what have you, there's going to be a need to kind of upgrade these systems, right, to keep at the frontier. And in fact, they're launching in a state that cannot be the end state because they're completely trusted, right? So they've got these like security council setups, and there has to be a way. There has to be a way to iterate out of that, right? So, something around the kind of like core protocol, like hashtag protocol, would be one of the things that you could build a notion of shared meaning around. So if you can build out
of the protocol, or what you're trying to do with the protocol in a way.
Yeah, so a lot of them. So for example, you can think as you move away from the protocol, you're looking more into like, okay, how do we nucleate this network? So what we've got at the moment is, we're pricing networks like, they're actually anything but empty ledgers, right? So these things start as empty ledgers and only really gain value with network effects. So the public goods philosophy really is like, how do we spend the capital that we've got in our treasury to build our network? Like, how do we nucleate a network across all these different things? And that can have all of these like arbitrary, should we fund ZK apps, or should we fund infrastructure, or should fund these libraries, the tooling and all this sort of stuff. So at the moment, most DAOs are like these blank slate sort of tabula rasa setups where anyone can make a proposal about anything, and consequently people do, right? And like
the compound one.
Yeah, like the compound one was a really interesting example of like, let's ape the entire treasury into some random DeFi thing. It's completely out of scope of anything that the DAO wants to do. So they have this like infinite scope of what it is that they intend to do, when no organization or sensible system would do that, right? You would have a bound on the scope of what you should and shouldn't do. So I think
for your semantic AI, like I'm guessing this is all off chain, or semantic AI. I'm confusing things I want to talk about, but
yeah, it does get to AI,
right? Well, yeah, because I mean, it sort of has to be off chain, right? Like whenever you're measuring these network effects, like of course a chain starts as just sort of a blank slate, but most of these systems, like even when you start, you have a whole community and a whole network of people who are invested in this project before the chain even gets going.
Yeah.
And so it's like and we've kind of failed to do that. Like we've started with like points for airdroppers, trying to measure contributions in some way that's not just do this one activity that we can measure on chain and you get paid for it.
Yep.
But yeah, it's how do you pay the core developers who sort of aren't on chain, but who are critical?
Yeah. So yeah, I consider these things socio-technical systems. So again, kind of from the governance world, but this like, these are a hybridization of kind of humans and technology. Right. So
these are good.
Yeah. So necessarily there's off-chain agents in this, and it's humans interact. None of these things, even Bitcoin, would operate without humans at the edges, right? So there's humans somewhere. There's necessarily always going to be some off-chain component. Smart contracts, until we get fully agentic systems, are still activated by people, putting data into the system and saying what they want to happen, and executing transactions and what have you. So there's always a degree of like off-chain world, right? So you do need to ultimately interact with humans and off-chain systems. So what the DAOs are largely, I see, as the interface for plugging humans into blockchains, right? So that they're like an interface layer for that social element to be able to govern and interact with technical systems. So yeah, really what we're looking for is how do we sort of build those systems for effectively allowing humans to shape a network, shape a decentralized system, and do it effectively and steer it in the right direction. And for that, you need to be able to make good decisions and handle this subjectivity problem. So yeah, the way I think about it is like, first, we've got to all figure out what we want to do. And if we're bootstrapping network effects and we're going to spend this treasury on doing that, how do we do it? And how do we broker the interaction with it? And I think largely we've got kind of stuck in this local minima of just running it like some kind of elaborate grant system, where anyone can propose anything. So we end up just overspending, ending up in these kind of doom loops of funding things that are completely out of scope for what we wanted to do, trying to do everything and doing nothing, that sort of scenario.
Do you like the retroactive stuff better?
I mean, I've just been, funnily enough, today, been fiddling around with this. It's insanely confusing. Like I was involved in, so I still do a bit of higher education work. I still run a postgraduate course in an architecture school. And there was a grant around for embedding public goods funding into university courses. And I'm thinking, well, I run a course on public goods funding to sort of like on the commons and DAOs. I'm pretty relevant to this, right? And I was reading I was involved in sort of creating the sort of grant, and then it just got so insanely confusing. I don't even know what happened to it. We put a bid in, and then I don't know what happened with it. It was just all sort of obliterated into like a complete mess. So I just kind of walked away from it and like, fine. And then it's kind of popped up again. Oh, this is still like apparently this mission request or an intent or something got, through. And okay, I'll apply for it. Go in application form. And it just like I get there and it's like, I'm thinking, well, what we're going to do is spend some of these OP tokens on funding public goods. And, we'll make an education course out of it. I'll spend my time and effort instead of just teaching this course in a classroom to make educational videos for the DAO and all this sort of stuff. I'll make a curriculum for the DAO, bring and integrate it into the course and all this sort of stuff. And I get there and it says, no selling rule. I'm like, no selling rule? And yeah, you're not allowed to sell it. I'm like, what? And so you're like, it's retroactive in the sense that I have to do all the work, and then the tokens are locked for a year.
Yep.
And then there's all these like bizarre, it's just spiraled into insane bureaucracy. right? And then fractured like bits of tooling and documents and governance posts, and it's just like it's just exploded into a total mess. So I love the idea, right? I
Okay.
like the idea that, I mean, I like the fact that they've given away, they've funded $120 million worth of public goods. But the effective spend is pretty awful, like 500,000 grants going to like influencers for writing the odd post about, optimism and all this sort of stuff. I like that it's happening. I think actually DAOs could step into a space of funding things that VCs don't. We largely don't have any social layer applications whatsoever, because the incentives are structured such that it makes just more sense to keep flipping $billion L2s into the market. So consequently, you've got infinite block space and nothing to do with it. So I'm looking at DAOs as these objects that can step into this realm and start funding the tooling and like actual stuff that might make these things useful.
Right.
But largely they've done it in a kind of emergent sense where they're just like, okay, we've got a DAO, right? We've got this, like, we've got $7 billion in the treasury, and everyone sort of rushes towards it, throwing in proposals, this, that, and the other. And then now we've got to make the tools for brokering access to it. There's a foundation in place somewhere. And, everyone's just been making it up as they go along and largely haven't really designed any governance systems in the past, right? So we've got like people who don't really understand governance, building governance systems. And yeah, consequently, they're all in a bit of a mess. So I'm hoping that we're going to find these kind of, largely I see this as we've just been thinking completely in the old paradigm in a new paradigm, right? We're just like plugging in, oh, well, grants work, so let's just do grants. And we run a grant system that's like the old academic grant system that I used to like hate with a passion.
Like, does it work in the real world? I don't even know.
No, it's awful. It's awful. Yeah. Like I spent years wrestling with academic grants and with the European Commission doing Horizon 2020 grants, this, that, and the other. It's a nightmare.
Right.
Nightmare of terrible bureaucracy. And we've just completely replicated exactly the same thing again.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like a lot of that is with governance. Like we're like speed running, basically the last 200 years where we're all like, oh, we'll give it to really rich people. Well, maybe we need to give it to democracy. Delegation sounds nice. And we're just going over it.
Absolutely.
Hilarious.
Yeah. And largely, I think that's one of the key affordances of this is, yeah, well, okay, we're gonna make all the same mistakes. Fine. But it's happening in a much more public fora. Right. And, if we saw what happens inside most companies and put it all on a governance forum and everyone in the world can go and look at it, we'd think companies were a bad idea, but the reality of it is, informationally, every mistake is public in DAOs, and consequently we are speed running it because we make the same mistakes and then go, oh, that was a mistake, and then everyone moans about it, and then we iterate a bit quicker. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, let's kind of bring it to like a more specific example, because like there's like DAOs, but DAOs are they're like the next level of governance after like the original one with blockchains, which is like Bitcoin or Ethereum, which is just like you don't do governance in a way, you sort of keep it off chain, and then you do like these soft consensus upgrades. I mean, what's sort of the problem with that, and should we move towards or away from it? Because Ethereum specifically keeps choosing this. Yeah, I think it's I like setting these boundary conditions. And if you think of like, as much as the Bitcoiners like say they don't have any governance, they do have governance, right? So like Bitcoin does have a governance system to it. And actually it has quite a complex governance system to it. Like if you can go back and look through the legacy of Taproot, through like how that's made its way in onto the protocol. There's, they've got the BIP framework. So like Amiataki created BIP 1 out of necessity of like, this is a mess. We need to figure out a process for like brokering access to what we should be focusing our time and effort on. What is our rough consensus as developers to what we should be focusing on and not. And yeah, most of that is the kind of they've emerged on like cult as the governance mechanism around that, right? Where it's like a religion where, you know, Satoshi's the god and the core devs are the priests, and you know, but they have governance and they have these synchronization moments where, you know, they have signaling where everyone's got to, like, all the node operators have to signal their intention to upgrade in advance of it, and that needs to go to 90% in order to so they have this kind of it's governance minimized, but there is governance, right? So that's how Bitcoin does upgrade, but it's incredibly unagile in the process for it. So it kind of, you know, forks like once every 3-4 years through these soft forking processes. Largely limited by the fact it, you know, it all needs to be backwards compatible. Whereas Ethereum does periodic hard forks, right? So it just allows backward compatibility to be eliminated. In fact, they've got like difficulty bombs where they actually kill the other forks and all these sort of things. But yeah, so Ethereum has opted for a more off-chain governance system that again is essentially coordinated through to, you know, the sort of priests in the system say this is the canonical hard fork, and you know, we move through that thing. But there is, again, just quite an interesting, it is a decentralized governance system. You know, there's many parallel teams working on, you know, the same tools, taking slightly different approaches, and it kind of works. And I do think we're kind of hitting the kind of limit on some of it, and Ethereum certainly, with the recent MEV sort of dynamic, is starting to get captured. And I think they're going to need to upgrade their governance beyond what they've got at some point. So you can't really escape this stuff, right? No matter how governance minimized you go with it, it always comes and finds you, right? It, like, there's always, especially when there's billion-dollar protocols and like, you know, you're a success now and this thing prints tens of millions of dollars a day. And everyone's going to find every little angle in which to open it up and squeeze their way in and position themselves and all that sort of stuff. So you can't really escape this stuff.
Yeah.
But I do think we should probably move backwards towards that sort of paradigm from, say, where we are with DAOs currently.
Sure. It's somewhere in the middle, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean, like I wrote a paper a while ago called governance optimization, where it's like, actually, you've got governance minimization, which is like, you know, we've set the rules, that's it, it's over. Like, there is no changing this. That's it. The developer has decided from now on, the rules are the rules. And I think we're closer to like governance maximization, where everything just spirals into committees and substructures and off-chain squabbles, and, you know, and there's a point in the middle which is the sweet spot, and you have to actually kind of search through this kind of space in order to find it for that system, because it's going to be different for every system.
Well, I mean, like, I actually had this debate a while ago with Micah Zoltu on ossification of Ethereum and a lot of these protocols. Yep. It's almost like some of it feels like ossification is an attack in some ways. You know, like on the Ethereum protocol, a lot of people are calling, listen, ETH isn't meant to be an O1, it's meant to be money. We shouldn't upgrade it. You know, we should sort of harden the protocol and make sure that we don't ever have any formal governance. We don't have any way of upgrading it, because its value proposition comes from never changing. And that's,
yep.
You know, and kind of like back to what you were talking about before with like, what are we actually trying to do? Because like, there's this sort of this big disconnect between, like, almost like we're talking over each other. Some people think ETH is money. Some people think we should have some sort of protocol layer, and we have sort of no direction, and it's causing debates.
It is, and this is where I think Ethereum would do well to actually reach some consensus on these issues, right? So you get these kind of emergent values questions, like, do we want to be ultrasound money, or do we want to be a world computer, right? Or do we want to be the kind of state machine for a satellite of roll-ups, and these things change over time. The world changes, context changes, participants change, and values shift, and what have you. And this is where I think you need these social consensus systems to set in to say, like, okay, who are the stakeholders in this network? And let's start to build out what is our North Star. And it is ultimately comes down to like values at that level, right? So yeah, I'd like to see Ethereum do more social consensus layer deliberation around these things. And yeah, I think would help, right? Because you get to like pull out and have the question, have the conversation be sort of deliberated. Do we want to be an ossified hard money system, or do we want to try and compete with Solana and start, forget about decentralization. Let's kill the solo stakers. Like, let's make it so everything needs to run in a server farm. Let's not worry about censorship resistance too much. Let's get faster and try and compete with Solana on this, that, and the other. So these are existential questions for Ethereum, and ultimately these are existential questions for everyone in all these systems.
But I think like it's different because like a lot of times we pull back examples into the real world, right? Whether it's how do you update a constitution, and you have amendments and things like that. But these are very different systems in that they're like opt-in, right? Like
yes.
you saw this with Bitcoin, and like with the Bitcoin Cash hard fork, like you had a lot of debate going on, and then we decided we were going to ossify Bitcoin. But like by that point, like most of the people who wanted to really just push Bitcoin to experimentation level had moved over to Ethereum. Like we're like, no, we're just going to go start our own thing. And same with Ethereum. Like if you had like this original, like maybe like a UBI crowd or something like that, and very lefty, they probably, most of Ethereum now is probably not there. It's probably this more financialized crowd and technical research. And it's like, should the values have shifted with it over time, or should it be fixed on those original values? And I don't like, there's still a few people who were there. Can you screw them over and change it on them? I don't know.
This is it. And I think like Vitalik's most recent post actually was on this kind of like making Ethereum alignment legible. I'm not sure if you read it, but he's basically, Vitalik is the talisman in this system, and largely I'm completely aligned with him on what Ethereum should be, and he's talking about, the values are open source, and, but he's puts in like, public goods is one of the things that we should focus on, right? And actually, I think Ethereum has a chance to be able to accommodate this plurality of like different things because of these L2s. So, there was a public goods chain. Gitcoin tried to set one up on Optima, didn't end too well. Not that many people actually care about public goods. But, there's the potential for these different crowds to emerge at the edges in these L2s, and they have their own treasuries. Right. And, they can actually, Ethereum could move towards this more, hyper financialized, governance minimized system that ossifies over time when this elaborate roadmap is, completed. And all of the experimentation and different value structures can exist in different islands next to it. So I think it's got a chance of doing that. Or it forks, like you say, like the Bitcoin, people who wanted to stay on Bitcoin, not move to Ethereum, do the experimentation, went off to Bitcoin Cash.
Right.
And, the last, and forking as a governance paradigm is something that is kind of very interesting. It is one of the core blockchain governance primitives, right? Like you can just fork off and go in different directions. And Ethereum could end up in that scenario at some point, particularly around the censorship resistance piece.
Yeah, I mean,
where
and anytime you want like the interoperability, right? Like we're still really struggling with that. Like how do you have any how do you have USDC and stuff in a bank account with forking? I don't.
Yeah, and this is it. I didn't like Justin Sun tried to do like a scam fork during the merge. If you remember, he tried to do
Yeah.
ETH POW, and we got into this whole question around like, is a fork even possible on Ethereum anymore, right? And the answer is no, right? Because actually, Circle and Tether basically decide the canonical fork, and the same could happen in Bitcoin. Actually, now we've got the ETFs. Like, can Bitcoin even fork now? Right? Because, vast chunks of it are controlled by Sailor, who's now, basically all in for KYC and giving Bitcoin to JP Morgan. And BlackRock own huge tons of it. And like, I think I'm not even sure Bitcoin's going to be able to remain permissionless in the long term because of that. So yeah, the real world asset dynamic does change, that it kills that affordance of being able to like fork into these different chains.
Yeah, no, I mean, now might be a good thing to sort of move into like actually, because I know a lot of what you've talked about is some real world assets and how to actually, like you could say that all of these systems are actually intended for some purpose, right? Like we have a real world out here where we have lives and families, and we want to make our lives better and distribute resources in a better way or in a more private way. So we make these systems. But then like, are they doing what they're supposed to do? How do you sort of map this back, like, because right now it just looks like we're like financializing everything, and is this like what these systems are used for, and then we should just sort of embrace it and know that this is going to be the outcome of it all.
Yeah, so to sort of dovetail back to this idea, like so I've been building like social consensus systems for a while. Like I built a decentralized organization before DAOs, and like so did this in the real world, and sort of built one for over 4 years, and felt the pain of what it's like to actually try and reach consensus across people. Did this inside an institution, and you do need ways for building these mental models across things. So I designed a system I call semantic ballot voting, which is basically like a token curated registry, if you remember those things.
Yeah.
And basically, like, let's say you've got a list of these semantic tags. So we've managed to discover the ontologies of what we're doing. And actually, I'm looking at AI as the way that you can get from natural language, let's all chat about it, to here's the topics, the semantic tags, the ontologies that we care about. And then you can vote on these things with your identity in the system. Every identity has a budget of voting credits. And we use quadratic voting to basically sort this list. So let's say we've got like we're doing an experiment at the moment called London Voice. So one of the things that's been a big bugbear of mine is that how DAOs have just been stuck in this, like, let's just concentrate on DeFi, like
Sure.
I do see DAOs as a potentially like really important primitive for like the real world, right? So I'm running a kind of parallel project explicitly focused on the real world, and getting real Londoners, non-crypto people, to use these tools to figure out what it is they care about. So people talk in this thing, we find out we care about policing crime, cost of living, economy, climate, healthcare, all these sort of things. And then people sort these by preference, and then add dialogue related to those things. So if you voted 7 on healthcare, why? Well, I need the NHS because my wife is ill and all this sort of stuff, and you can pull out all this rich information. And what you've essentially got is this rich data set of identities in the system, meaning with these sort of like hashtags, which might be healthcare, might be climate, whatever. And by voting on them, you've set the edges in a graph on this. So you create a graph of meaning around what you care about, and everyone does the same. And we build a network a semantic network between us of all of this meaning. And from that, you can derive a degree of the DAO wants this, right?
Sure.
So, and AI is great at interpreting all this stuff, right? So you've got this big mess of natural language, weighted preferences, all that sort of stuff. And you come out with a sorted list of the thing we care most about is the economy, which is generally how these votes have been dropping. It's the economy, stupid. Everyone cares about that, right? You know, people care about taxes and cost of living and all that sort of stuff. And consequently, it allows you to direct where your funding and conversation and focus should be, because you've just discovered what everyone cares about. And this is largely, I think, what a lot of DAOs are missing, is a coherent view of what everyone cares about.
Yeah.
And from that, you can then decide how you're going to split that treasury up and your program of work.
Well, I mean, how do you handle for sort of, I guess the questions are always tough, whenever you're coming up with this, because they almost make what the answers
yes
are. Because
yes.
I had done survey design back in a decade ago, and if you ask somebody are you for school funding, they'll say yes, and then you say can we increase administrator salaries in schools, and they'll say no. And so they're kind of similar, and it's just different how you phrase the question. Or same if you put in information with it, inflation is actually only 1% over the past year. Is it too high for you now? And versus saying is inflation a concern? And so it's
yeah. So that's a really great question. And it's, again, one of the things that got me to this was thinking, I used to run a research methods course, and used to run a master's courses in research methods, and been thinking about this for a long time. And the amount of power that a question creator has is huge, right, in that power dynamic. And again, this appears in DAOs as who gets to make the proposals, right, decides so most DAO decisions are some dev going, shall we do this? And everyone just going, yeah, okay, right? Because the proposal
creator,
it is. And or that in itself is just plutocratic, and you have this you need the compound one was interesting in this because you needed X% of the token supply, a few $1 million worth of comp to even make the proposal. And then, so yeah, the proposal creator, the agenda setter, has huge amounts of power in this scenario. We see this in polling. So YouGov in the UK basically dictates the discourse across the nation by deciding what questions it asks people. And then the media just gobble up the country thinks this. And it thinks that because you asked them the question. And some of this is just super weird. They asked one recently, would you prefer fascism or communism? was a literal YouGov survey. What? And I given that I know that how much influence that they have, what are they up to? It's so. Yeah, this system I've designed there is no question creator, right? So everyone just comes in. There's no question. It's blank. And I call this it's an emergent governance idea, right? The questions emerge from the people directly through their natural language. So everyone just says what they want. And from this, we pick out these kind of emergent ontologies and then sort them. And instead of the question is, what do we want? Or you can talk about anything.
Yeah.
And then from this kind of emergent meaning, you can start to get towards specific questions and be more located around, all right, then we all care about cost of living. What can we do about it? We care about housing. What can we do? And so the questions emerge later rather than being the first thing. So that's designed to decentralize the agenda setter, the proposal creator, which is one of the key pieces, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is I've sort of seen this trend, you have these systems and they work really well, even as we move towards AI being able to solve it, but they need this data. So is it sort of like, does the system only work well when it's listening to us 24/7? You know what I mean? Like if
I
there,
mean,
yeah, if you're shy about talking about your sexual needs on to the AI program, do you ever get that prioritized? I don't.
yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and largely, I think a really important one, because one of the reasons why I want to get into this AI question with DAOs is because um, they are questions we need to answer, right?
Right.
So there has to be private implementations for these. The way we want to go for this is you have a purely private local model
Okay.
that you deliberate these things, right? And then you only publish, and then you can actually put these votes in privately from your identity. For one, it's pseudonymous anyway. So you're in there as I'm not Nick in there. I'm, ID number 75 or something like that. So again, I designed this so it could pass like an ethics board for a research data collection mechanism, right? It has to be pseudonymized. Can't backtrack the data to the person that put it in. And you can do that by simply starting a fresh wallet on a blockchain and voting with that. So we kind of we subsidize the mints. We're going to get there with account abstraction. So you can come in, set a completely fresh identity in, no transaction graph, and then vote in the system and have your voice heard whilst your IRL personhood is disconnected from that. So like privacy is going to be one of the key components of a system like that. So you can go in there and talk about your sexual preferences and no one will ever know it's you, right? And that's one of privacy is going to be super important for this. None of that you get out of OpenAI, right? So and plus like being able to govern these things in a sovereign fashion is going to be important, or we let corporates control the truth. So these social consensus tools are going to be absolutely critical to crack, because it's not just a DAO problem, it's a real world problem that if we don't crack, people will step in and just do it for us. And historically, that's been the kind of state through its representative governance systems. But increasingly in the future, that's going to be whoever controls these APIs of truth, where everyone gets their information from.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's like, I think it's just going to be in the future who gets to craft the narrative for what people are talking about in these systems, similar to like, if you watch Fox News, you see bad stories about immigrants all day. And if you watch, MSNBC, you see stories about cops being racist. And then it's like, you wonder why you think this. And, both may be true even, but it's just like what information you're being fed is hard.
And yeah, to your point about like, do we need to be on it all day? These things need data, right? So the question is like, for one, the DAOs get captured, and that's sort of that point as well. They get captured by apathy a lot of the time, right? So only the most dedicated forum warriors are the ones who get like funded out of these things, right? They're the ones who will relentlessly fill out all the forms, be there every day, respond to everything. They've got loads of time to kill. And largely the passive token holders really don't give a shit about any of this and just couldn't care less and just let these guys get on with it. So what you need to do is find ways to bring in that wider set of network participants into the governance systems, and largely just making it fun and like actually just capturing their language and what they're talking about. There's going to be very trivial things like we want the token to go up, right? And which is one of the reasons why I like quadratic voting, because okay, number go up is one of the things. If you vote 10 on it, you can't vote on anything else, right? Okay, you've expressed all your opinion. If you vote on a bunch of other stuff, you might get 45 or 50 votes. If you just go all in on number go up or marketing, when marketing or something like that, then you've just used it all up, right? And so we need to get better mechanisms for bringing in that wider set of network participants and their collective intelligence, so the more core members to the system can better facilitate their needs. And And it might be like, yeah, we want some NFT stuff to play with on the chain, like we want some gamble-fi or whatever. I like gambling on meme coins. All right, then. Well, let's put some meme coin infrastructure down then. But at the moment, we've got like entire networks that just pivot to whatever the current trend is all the time, and the trends are so quick that they just burn out. And so it is governance, in my view, that is basically missing from a lot of what the space needs at the moment.
Do you see it? Edmund Edgar. I don't know if you know him at all, but he's
the name does ring a bell. He was a protocol dev, right?
He's reality.eth. He's built oracles for a long time. Super cool guy.
Yeah.
But anyway, he always says like, maybe we just need these things to be temporary. So like just have, this thing's alive for a cycle and then there's no way to upgrade it. So we all just opt out and we will come back and make a new one in the next cycle. And like, maybe
I mean,
that's the key.
It is. And like, I quite like, management keyless, permissionless systems. The thing I'm sort of, these kind of ephemeral structures that like turn up, do a thing, and then they burn out. Like one of the things that there should be systems that actually not just like die out organically because people get bored with them, but actually terminate once the job's done. Right? It's one of the reasons why I like factory contracts of these things. Like you can just print these things out. You get a completely permissionless system that exists for a period of time to do a thing. It emits X amount of tokens and then just, is no longer needed. It just terminates. So yeah, I like that attitude of kind of evolutionary design around like there's something kind of beautiful about these systems which are like hyper Darwinian, right? The systems that really bite, and then the systems that don't just die, disappear, and then just this rapid iteration around these things. And in fact, one of the things that I thought DAOs would be beautiful at is this, right? These things would turn up, do something brilliant, or blow up and die, and everyone would see it happen, and it'd just be complete chaos, and there's thousands of DAOs popping out, and just like all sorts of crazy stuff happening. But like 5 survive. And then everyone sees that those 5 survive and copy what they do and then mess that up in different ways, and you just get this like really Darwinian evolutionary thing. Now that's getting a lot harder with things like regulations where, in order to set up a DAO now, you need 250 grand in a Cayman foundation, this, that, and the other, right? When really they should just be gas fees.
You see this with companies too, where we're kind of hyper, like this is the same problem with like US corporations. Like you have sort of zombie companies who keep running, even though they're not useful, but they have a boatload of cash and a popular ticker symbol. So they continue to run. And, we would all be better off if JCPenney's and Macy's and them went under, but like we're sort of stuck with them. And at the same time, it's really hard to create new ones, right? Like you have to millions of dollars in legal fees.
So this was largely the whole promise of all this, the whole DAO thing really was that we'd learn about coordination on the meta level. So if you're like a chain, if you're like trying to govern an L2 or whatever, you might want a lot of these, permissionless one-shot, token systems that, live and die very quickly or whatever. But what you want to do is cultivate a system at the kind of overarching level of like, okay, we want more of those systems and we want like, less of them or whatever.
So I guess let's just, as we come up on an hour, how do we create this? You're working on, say, you had already mentioned decentralized AIs. Do we need to somehow figure out how to get people to fill out these surveys and feed in the information? Or what's kind of the next steps to good governance?
Yeah, so my sort of philosophy on this is we need frameworks for you need a framework to work within, but ultimately you've got to recognize that it's going to need to be an evolutionary system. So my idea for Factory DAO would be like as a protocol DAO system that would potentially govern a network. Is you need things that are social and things that are technical, more crypto economic governance minimized, right? So we need to fix the token economics for these things, right? So at the moment, everything is born captured, right? So nearly every system that hits the market now is just going to be down only, right, for years, right? And
as you mean
unlocks like some 4-year vesting schedules. 30% of the supply is going to make it into the market. It's $5 billion on day one. We need to get, in order to keep the price static for the next 4 years, we need like, $5 billion worth of buyers. Not going to happen, right? So we need to find ways of bootstrapping these mechanisms where the capital for setup is not all provided by centralized actors. We need to get back into like crowdfunding mechanisms, right? We need to get back in ICOs were the best period of crypto ever, right? And the most of them turned into scams because literally the mechanism at the time was, you put ether in the pot, get magic beans out, and the guys on the other end might do something, might not. That mechanism never had a chance to mature and iterate and go through this kind of Darwinian process of evolving. And that's largely, again, where I think DAOs come in, right? Because it holds that capital to account, right? The money just doesn't go into an EOA where it's spent by a centralized team. It goes into a space where the community can take their money out if they don't like the way it's going, and get to inform the direction of it. So we need better crowdfunding. We need better market bootstrapping mechanisms that doesn't require centralized exchanges, right? It doesn't require market makers. Totally sovereign market creation. We need to then be able to like govern a commons together in a way that is actually aligned with a much broader set of market participants, right? So we need radically new ways of like governing these systems. A lot of the way I see it playing out is that you'll have like a meta governance system, which is like what I call layer one governance. It's the reality shifting stuff. It's forking your smart contracts at the protocol level. It's treasury spend directly from the main treasury. But and you do this infrequently, right? Like maybe like expecting everyone to turn up and vote all the time is just never going to work. But if we say, let's vote up twice a year and we're going to execute a load of transactions in one batch, that is, and like you just turn up for that, right? That's like low effort governance, I call it, right? You just like turn up twice a year, like 1st of June, like whenever, another one like in January, and do all the layer one business. And then everything gets split into like a fractal governance structure where you have these big, like, here's protocol. And then you might have substructures of the protocol work in smaller, like sub DAOs, if you like. And then you can keep breaking these problems down until everyone ends up in the kind of local scope that no one needs to keep an eye on everything. You're just in a group, maybe with like 6 people. You've got a budget to get a job done. And then if you ship it, you get more money the next time.
Sure. Yeah, I like it. I've actually thrown around the idea like we should have a DAO where we upgrade it once a year and we all meet at like a motel in Nevada or something.
Yeah.
And we just you can give your key to somebody else and they can show up on behalf of you, but it's like just like it's just shady location.
I think there's a point I've had similar thoughts actually where like instead of these meetups just being like, weird attention games of like and free cocktails, like they actually were useful in some way, right? There's like everyone goes there, we all have a discussion about what the next thing we do, and we actually go and actually it's a way to build trust, right? And the Sybil problem is just like to move into this world away from pure crypto economic governance and like pure plutocracy, you need like move into this reputation dynamic, and you need to like ultimately discover that this is a real person at the other end of it.
Yep.
And the
I,
only real way to do that is go and meet them.
yep.
Right. And it's going to come back down to the real world, where it doesn't necessarily all go to Nevada, but we could have like networks of meetings all over the world.
Yep.
And yeah, this is a bit like my idea for London Voice, really, was that, yeah, we have London Voice, but we also have Dublin Voice and Berlin Voice, and build these kind of like location specific spots and let the DAO scale that, just put the money to get people set it up. But yeah, I think that's it. Meeting IRL is going to be a key thing for DAOs to do.
So are you currently having people do this London Voice thing? Like, are they recording?
Yeah, I met a bunch of people at a community group last Wednesday.
Nice.
And, they're kind of like, they loved the idea, actually, because I thought I was going to have a hard time winning them over. But they could see it as a way to have their voice heard.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, they're a bit spooked by AI. I mean, like both crypto and AI have this kind of terrible sentiment out in the wider world. No one really trusts this stuff. Crypto, understandably. But yeah, I think people do actually want to see, like, I do actually think like DAOs are the thing that could actually go mainstream, because it's people live in communities, like real communities exist. And if there's tools that turn up that facilitate people to actually like be a better community, get more stuff done as a collective. We fixed the park, like, so all you need is a few of these things where people have managed to like, make some money together, put it in a pot and decide how to spend it. And it's got real world utility, which most of the stuff doesn't at the moment.
Yeah. Have you tried to like game it? Like, can you as like one participant come on and just say like dinosaurs over and over, and then maybe you did some dinosaur research or something?
We've not got that far yet, but like I do want a red team on this eventually, right? So I've got this whole elaborate idea for this where, everyone's got an opinion about London, right? But eventually you want these to be like expert groups. So there's like a condensed matter physics DAO where full of condensed matter physicists deliberating the latest condensed matter physics research or whatever. And then you kind of network these expert groups up to solve problems, right? That's the end game. But every game will be gamed, right? So, it's a perpetual battle. The like, everyone likes these nice simple solutions, this kind of Web 2 attitude of like, let's build a thin wedge, kind of like hit this market niche in this thing and like make it work and it'll work forever, and we just need to make it a successful app. But decentralized systems just aren't that, right? They're just like the emergent social systems, and we have no idea what's going to happen. Like, one of the fundamental principles of these things is that they have outcome indeterminacy. You don't know what's going to happen before it's happened, because it's decentralized. And like, people find it really difficult to let go of, like, I don't know what's going to happen. So yeah, like, we need to find how to do this stuff, like, not just for DAOs, but like for just to get better at problem solving and in an increasingly like complex world.
Cool. Yeah, well, this was super fun. I mean, we're at an hour. Anything else you want
that went quick, man.
I know. Blast. Anything else you want to touch on or bring up before things you would want to work on?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll just sort of sign off with like where I think the sort of next era is. I think there's a few things that are worth thinking about. I do think we need to swing back from the current state of DAOs, which is like these pseudo grant systems where everyone just spins up committees and we just kind of like, let's have all this kind of like centralized group sort it out. And then these professional delegates come in and get paid, and it just ends up centralized and captured and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think we should be thinking about these as like networks of permissionless smart contracts. So we do have the management keyless things, but like a DAO is not just a monolithic structure. It's a network of smart contracts doing all these things. And we should be aiming for these cybernetic systems that self-regulate and evolve over time and learn over time. And I also think that eventually this ends up with like futarchy and prediction markets leading the governance. And we just need to find ways of pushing humans to the edges of these systems in ways that isn't just like basic token voting.
Well, it's because you want to push humans to the edge, but then keep the value as human goods. Like,
yes,
like you want good things to happen, because like if you just let the markets run wild, they might do things that humans don't want. And
yeah, exactly. So yeah, we need that kind of values as the base layer for these things. So yeah, anyone who's thinking about designing these sort of DAO systems is like finding ways that are genuinely participatory and get people to buy in. There's a notion of like psychological ownership. If people feel like they've been part of building it, they feel like they own it. So bringing in more and more people who are actually bought into the system just is the core basis of alignment across these systems. So yeah, just finding ways to actually empower people in these systems to do something.
For sure. Man, that was super fun. Where can people find you? Find more?
You can find factorylabs.org is our company. Factorydao.org is our DAO. And you can find me on Twitter, Dr. Nick A.
Okay, super great. Thank you for coming on.
Cheers, mate.